I've been a user of the deep web for quite a long time, going through the various deep sites and seeing what's out there. There are some interesting people and pages that exist, but if you don't know what you're doing, I really don't recommend getting involved in it. I've been in too deep for a while, and the story I'm about to tell you was at a time in my life where I was out of control and just doing stupid things. Back in the day, I used to be one of those deep and dark web users that may or may not have been involved in some questionable activity. Of this questionable activity, the worst was doing business with a website that was very similar to Silk Road. It wasn't Silk Road, but it was obviously trying to be, and as dumb as it sounds, the prices were more competitive than others. Thinking back to it now, that should have been a red flag. The bigger sites had methods of vetting and verification of their sellers. They knew who they were working with, and the security was definitely part of the pricing structure. But when you're a broke college kid that's addicted to certain medications, you don't really think too hard on the security of your dealer. Basically, your only thoughts are, do they have what I want, and can I afford it? So, obviously, I knew what I was doing back when I got involved with these sites and these people. I knew it was illegal, and I knew that I had no way of disputing if my dealer didn't come through, and I would have no manner of taking any legal action against the site or the seller. The site had an interesting system in place. The sellers wouldn't list what they had beyond a few cryptic user tags, and they had what they called a traffic light system. Basically, the seller could mark their stock based on a color. Green was full, yellow was limited, and red was offline and not selling. If it was green, you could basically send them the money and get what you wanted. Yellow typically required a message to make sure that they had what you wanted, and red meant, don't contact me. It was actually pretty damn smart and cut out having to incriminate yourself by specifically listing what you had. And it also cut down on the communication requirements. You just bought what you wanted and you moved on. In my time on this site, there was one user that I worked with regularly over the 2 years. They were dependable and, strangely enough, incredibly polite when I had to message them. I know that sounds stupid, but they typically signed their messages with "Have a nice day" or "Thank you for your business." Not something you would expect from a person committed to doing something that's illegal. They were the only person I wanted to work with on this site, and they always came through. In my time doing business with them, they had always been green or yellow. I can't recall once over the 2 years when they switched over to red. Well, that is until the last time that I put an order in with them. I got on the site as normal and saw that he had marked himself as yellow. No big deal. I just sent him a message basically asking if my usual was available. Almost immediately after, his page had switched over to red. I was a bit annoyed at this as he'd always come through, and I was, as I said, an addict. I went over to his page and sent him another message that basically said, "Hey man, what gives?" And within a few moments, I got a message back that said, to put it kindly, "F off." Now this came as an honest surprise to me as, like I said before, he had always been so cordial. I responded with something like, "Do you not want my money anymore?" And I waited for about an hour to see if he sent a message back, but he never did. It was a few days later that I went back to see if maybe he had stock again. I think part of me seriously thought that the seller was just having a bad day, or maybe it was a partner of his that wasn't as polite. When I logged in, I saw that I had a message from him. I clicked it, and it said, "I have your usual, send me the money." I was a bit wary at first, but I was also naive and needed it to keep my mind focused and study for my exams. Despite my initial hesitation, I went ahead and I sent him the money. I replied, letting him know that the money was sent, and then I waited. I think I messaged him once or twice after that within the week, but he had been offline since our last interaction and hadn't changed his account from red. About a week after our last interaction, I got the package. The box looked like it was heavily used and trashy. This was in a complete contrast from what I was used to. And when I opened it, it was lacking pretty much all of the security that the seller normally had. He would typically pack inconspicuous items in with the order, usually stuffed animals. I'm assuming it was because they worked as both security and padding. Instead, the box was full of packing peanuts and tissue paper. I dumped it out on the floor and I checked it, thinking that I was duped. But then I saw the pill bottle and an envelope with what appeared to be a letter. The first thing I did was open the letter. It said, "Consider this your last order. Jimmy is out of the trade. Thank you for your business." I was a little pissed off since I was going to have to now find a new person on the site to work with, but at the same time it wasn't a huge deal. At least I had about 60 days before that was going to be a problem. That was my last thought until I grabbed the bottle and opened it. I removed the lid and I saw that inside the bottle were fingernails. I don't mean like fingernail trimmings, I mean fingernails that had been ripped out of the bedding of the finger. 10 of them to be exact. The edges of them looked like they had dried blood, which told me that they had been forcibly removed. It was then that the letter's meaning became a bit more dark, with Jimmy being out of the trade. And to answer any potential questions, I never went back to the site. I never went back to any drug sites on the deep web at all. This scared me to the point that I pretty much abandoned all illegal activity. And to those that are curious, no, I didn't go to the police. I wanted to. I wanted to tell them that it was possible that someone had been murdered, but how exactly does one explain that with what I had? I couldn't waltz into the precinct, slam a pill bottle full of fingernails down and say, "My drug dealer has been murdered." Technically, he could have pulled them out himself, which was likely not possible. So, anyway, that's my story. Stay off of the dark web. The deep web is probably okay, and don't do drugs. I want to preface this story by saying that if you have any curiosity about the deep web or the dark web, just get rid of it right now. If you're an everyday user and you aren't in the know of how onion routing, encryption, VPNs, and things like that work, then use these stories as a way to satisfy your curiosity. Don't start down that rabbit hole and don't dig any deeper than you need. That said, let's get into some backstory. I'm a tech nerd 100%. I'm the type of person that was ripping apart old PCs in the 80s and then putting them back together just to see what worked with what. Now mind you, that was back when I was a kid. I learned about all the tech back then, and I took that passion into my adulthood. So now I work in IT, if that wasn't obvious, and I know a lot about what goes on out there on the net. Now, that's all well and good, but that's all surface web and surface tech level stuff. The question from here becomes, how does being a geek equal a dark web horror story? Well, simple. I've been there. In fact, I've been there probably more than many of the stories that you've heard on this channel and many others out there. I've seen quite a bit, and maybe I'll give you a few more stories in the future, but this is one that I think is worth telling, mostly because it's honestly terrifying. Back when I was on the dark web frequently, there was one site that I used to venture towards. Now obviously I'm not naming the site because, as far as I know, it's still out there. This site was kind of like a dark web bazaar. You could buy pretty much anything and everything you could really want, and it wasn't terribly expensive. I used to buy things that were less than legal, and I even used to sell some stuff that was also less than legal. Honestly, this site had everything: substances, weapons, stolen goods. If you wanted it, you could find it there. The dealers had their ratings that would pretty much tell you how reputable they were, and the higher the rating, the better the overall service or quality of what you ordered. Think eBay rating, but for drugs and other illegal stuff. One day, and one conversation sticks in my mind as probably the most memorable thing that's ever happened while I was on the dark web, in this particular sales site. I was browsing the content just for the hell of it, seeing what was out there that I may have wanted to blow money on, and I saw an entry that was a bit strange. Girlfriend for sale. Honestly, I thought it was a joke. Maybe someone was selling their old silicone doll and wanted to have an eye-catching title. I went on to the page and I scrolled down to the description, and it didn't help any more than the title. It simply said, "Selling my girlfriend, message for details." At this point, I felt like I had to message the person, and so I did. And here's how that conversation went. I said, "I wanted to ask about your girlfriend for sale." He said, "All right, what do you want to know?" I said, "Pretty much everything." He goes, "All right, she's 27, a bit on the thicker side. She has black hair, green eyes, freckles." There was more information that he included here. He used other words to describe her body type, gave exact measurements, and went into a bit of personal details on her. I'm not going to put them here as I want to keep this story out of graphic territory. But after he told me all of this, I obviously knew it wasn't a sex doll. He was legitimately trying to sell a real person. I wasn't sure what to do or say at this point, so I just said, "Go on." He said, "Would you like to see her? It may make it easier to see if you're really interested." I replied with, "Okay." He then sent me a few pictures of this woman tied up and gagged in his basement. She looked exactly like he had explained. Her wrists were bound with duct tape, and she had a chain around her neck that looked to be connected to a concrete pillar in the basement. The look on her face was one of legitimate terror. You could tell that she had been crying excessively, and her hair was a mess. He then sent me photos of her in what I'll describe as compromising situations and positions. I won't get into the details, but honestly, it made me want to vomit. When I clicked on this entry on the site, I was expecting it to be a joke, but these pictures and what he told me had me pretty certain that it was real, and that scared the hell out of me. Then he sent me another message. "I have one other interested buyer that's offering $70K in cash by next week. If you can get me at least 75, she's yours." I was so shocked that the only thing I could think to do was ask what her name was, to which he replied, "Sorry, I can't give out her name in case you want to do something stupid, like try to find her or contact the police." I replied with, "Oh, no, I wouldn't dare. I was just curious." His response to that chilled me to the bone. He said, "Good, because it wouldn't matter. There's no one that'll miss her, and on paper, she's been dead for a month. I do what I can to make my transactions stress-free. That includes my prospective buyers, and I expect them to help me keep things stress-free as well. So please, don't do anything stupid." He compounded this last sentence with a smiley face emoticon, which really added to the threat, to be honest. And I honestly had no idea what else to say. I didn't know if this was legitimate or if it was a honeypot seller trying to arrest human traffickers. I just told him that I would try to get the money together, and if he didn't hear from me by the time the other seller came through, that was fine. I didn't want to raise any alarms with this guy regardless of who he really was. I really don't have more to this story, unfortunately, other than to say that I have no idea what happened to her or the seller. I didn't follow up, and I just kind of let the situation go. I know this makes me an awful person, and I've lost sleep over it, but I'm more hopeful that it was just a honeypot and that he was trying to lure me into being arrested more than actually trying to sell his girlfriend.